Chain Talk for 2022. This afternoon, we're talking about the supply chain skills shortage and particularly focusing on retaining and developing your talent. But before that, as usual, we will focus on a relevant news article. And I'll bring my guests on in a moment. So as we discuss the topic and the news item, do feel free as usual to comment and ask questions using the panel on your screens. And as always, we'll be awarding a Supply Chain Talk mug to the contribution or question that we value the most. And we'll try and get around to addressing some of them, if not every comment. So my guests this week are, firstly, Melanie Salter, who is the Director of Supply Chain Research at Boom Global Network. And Boom Global Network interviews inspiring women in supply chain and celebrates their successes. It researches opportunities to increase female representation and equality for all in the supply chain, and it supports the community of Boom with hundreds of members around the world. So and the mission is very much to help women in the supply chain profession to flourish in their careers for the benefit of all. So I'm sure we'll find Melanie's experience and insights incredibly relevant for today's topic. My second guest is Anna Maria Velika, who is founder and director of Green Apple's Career. So for the previous 20 years, Anna has international experience in procurement and supply chain in organizations like BAT, Heineken and Nestle. And it's this year that she has become an entrepreneur founding Green Apple's Career, which is a career mentoring hub for underrepresented professions and for organizations that want to drive transformations in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion. So welcome, Anna Maria. And finally, Bethany Windsor is Head of Programs and Relationship Manager at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, UK. And she's also Program Manager for Generation Logistics, which is a government and industry-backed initiative that promotes the logistics sector for those unaware of its opportunities. So again, incredibly relevant for the supply chain shortage of skills. And as a former teacher, Bethany's personal and professional passion is inspiring the next generation of supply chain professionals. So welcome all three of you. And let's turn now to this week's news article. Which is from The Australian. It's a nice reminder that we shouldn't focus too much on the UK or US sometimes with our articles. So this one's from The Australian, and as you can see, it's entitled "Staff Shortages, a Serious Business Issue." And I guess it's interesting, some of the very first messages are very relevant particularly for us in the UK, but I think in the US as well, and indeed other countries, because it talks about a supply chain shortage in terms of people, and some elements of the industry in Australia are calling for an immediate increase in the number of skilled migrant visas, which we're seeing in some sectors here, including transport and supply. Certainly, I think many of us can remember, it seems a long time ago, but just last year, we had the huge problem of the driver shortage for HGV drivers. And that was only partly, not sort of saying it's a total reason, but certainly one of the reasons cited was Brexit, meaning that we had less European drivers interested or willing or able to work in the UK. So those calls for visas are certainly a very relevant one. And the final thing I'll just say about the article for now is that it goes on to make the point it's not just around Australia. It also talks about a recent report by DHL, which is called the Supply Chain Talent Shortage, and that talks about much more worldwide findings, and essentially it's a very common problem of shortages in staff in the supply chain. So Melanie, perhaps turning to you first, what are your thoughts? Do you think the article was spot on, or do you think it missed anything, and what do you think are some of the solutions for that supply chain shortage?
It's such a huge topic. I don't think any single article could cover all of it, but it actually covers a very nice range of topics in there. And the bit I'm going to home in on at the end is around the diversity, equity, inclusion. It's like we've got this shortage across the industry, but hey, we're in the UK. I think we're all sitting here in the UK. I don't think it's unfair to say we know that it's a very white male-dominated industry, but the fabulous opportunity that presents, and they talk about this in the article, is like there are untapped labor pools we're just not getting at. So if we can recruit more women and people from minority groups, that starts to address the the talent shortage. And the beauty of it is that there's this huge body of research, more being added to all the time, which just says cognitive diversity improves the performance of your business. So there's just like this, it's not just diversity for the sake of, hey, it's a nice thing to do. It's like, no, it just makes business sense. Forget it's the right thing to do. Forget your money will be more profitable. You will have this cognitive diversity. You will do better if you hire a bigger mix of people.
Absolutely, thank you. And Anna Maria, I'm turning to you. I'm sure you'll agree with that.
Yes, I was nodding because Melanie, this is music to my ears. And this is one of the reasons why after 20 years of successful international career in supply chain in a male-dominated function, I said, okay, I'm going to resign, join the big resignation to do actually something that I'm really passionate about. But I can't I think it resonates what Melanie said. You can lead by example, but there are moments like this one when an example can be an exception. And I no longer wanted to be an exception, surrounded by British male colleagues. So I think transparency in pipeline, empowering women, and more inclusive hiring processes to allow a very healthy pipeline of talent, to allow women to flourish and embrace this amazing career. It's an amazing career. Also, I think it's a generational reality. So if we look at the generation, the baby boomers are retiring, yeah? And they used to be in management positions. And what we are seeing is we are seeing millennials entering the workforce, the supply chain arena, but they have been able only to secure entry-level jobs. So it's a gap in terms of management and entry level. Here again, we need HR to really realize not only diversity, equity, inclusion is important, but also this generational movement, and also the post-pandemic, we've seen an amazing boom in the demand. So the supply cannot keep up with the demand.
That's definitely been a real factor.
Yes.
Yeah. And Bethany, I mean, thinking about the generational thing, I know that some of the work that you're doing is very much in trying to encourage younger people to recognise, basically change their perceptions of supply chain. So I mean, from what Anna Maria says, we're losing older people, or will be certainly in the coming years, and younger people in many ways aren't attracted. So that sounds like an incredibly important lever to be working on.
Yeah, I think the thing that really resonated with me from that perspective in the article was the two-speed crisis. It's really easy and really understandable to look at the right now. We are short. We deliver everything. We deliver Christmas. We keep Great Britain moving, and to think we are struggling with that is never a nice position to be in. But that can make us quite short-termist. And that it is a phrase I should be stealing, the two-speed crisis, because I think if we can look further ahead and start, not that the now isn't important, of course, but we've got to have a balance. So there's something, the statistic is 49% of warehouse managers and directors will retire by 2025. That's very fast upon us. And arguably, as you very kindly said in your intro, that passion of mine is getting the next generation in. They are not necessarily going to be warehouse directors by 2025. Some of them might. I hope they will. But we've also got to think about those people with transferable skills. So the Generation Logistics Programme works a lot with young people, absolutely, to try and change their perceptions, but also with people like returners to work. So that might be after redundancy, after being in prison, after shared parental leave, as well as job changers, those working in finance, HR, IT, in other sectors, who can very easily and bring those much needed skills over to logistics, but only if they know that we exist.
Yeah.
And I think that's, that for us is one of the biggest challenges. How do you promote a sector that either people know very little about, and we've done quite a bit of benchmarking research in that regard, or they only know the bad things about it. Supermarket shelves stocked every day is not front page news, but the lorries stacked up at Kent, or facilities for drivers, or redundancies, or lack of toilet rolls, all of those things are front page news, and that that does a disservice, I think, to the wonderful, fast-paced, well-paid world that we do work in. But getting that across, I think, is a huge challenge, and not having done that before in a sustained way is what contributes to that short-term crisis, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think actually on that, I mean, as you say, there's always the negatives when there's shortages and disruption, but also in terms of actually people thinking about it as a career, is always the negatives. Oh, here's this nasty retailer who works their staff incredibly hard in their warehouses, and
I think I'm being glib here, but the public's perception in general is there are two jobs in supply chain: picking, packing, and driving.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at an apprenticeship level, degree apprenticeship level, graduate role, direct entry manager role, perhaps for a job changer, there's not the awareness, understandably so. It's not not a criticism of the education system or anything like that. But if you think about great business people, Karen Brady or Richard Branson, or pick your person of choice, you would think business person, not logistician. I mean, I'll argue anyone's a logistician, but we don't have films where logistics is what solves the problem. We need a bit more of that.
Great film though, it'd be amazing, and be really efficient.
We need more of that to kind of help the public perception. And to be fair, the COVID, the delivery of the vaccine, the fact that we kept our shopping brought to us, our entertainment brought to us, having that key worker moniker has helped to augment the perception of the profession in many people's eyes, but still at that very close to me driver, picking and packing role. So there's absolutely more to be done there to talk about the breadth and the depth of the profession to get more people interested.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in terms of, Melanie, Melanie, perhaps turning to you. I mean, I think with all the work you do in helping women in logistics and supply chain, develop their careers. I mean, I guess that just sort of shows from what I think Bethany was saying earlier. The generation problem. That percentage, 50% of managers going to be retiring in supply chain by 2025. I mean, there's huge opportunities for junior starters, and so is there much more we should be doing there to meet the shortage that's mentioned in the news item?
Yeah, we need to get more people in all the way through. But I mean, if you take it purely from a gender point of view, it's actually in a lot of places it's about 50-50 early on. And then further up the hierarchy, just the number of women just drops off dramatically the further you go through, which is sort of the maternity penalty. And it's a major thing. It's taking so many women out, and it's supporting, that we've had big changes just coming in recently in the UK, which is about, looking at affordable and free childcare up until the age of 10 for children, which will have a massive impact on keeping women in the workforce, which, surprise, surprise, actually benefits everyone again. I love it. There's always a really positive business case for making the right choice, which I don't think gets talked about enough. It's a really great thing.
Well, we'll talk about it further in a minute.
What I like, because I've amazing opportunity in my role at Boom is that I get to talk to chief supply chain officers around the world, and and I was talking to one. He's a chief supply chain officer at a global FMCG, and he was talking about removing invisible barriers for women so that they don't get stuck at that sort of middle management and it's hard to hop. And he's saying we suddenly realized that if we wanted anyone to progress, they had to have run a manufacturing plant. But women often don't have the same ability as men because husbands won't often, give up their career to move around the country. So it's like, how do we remove that invisible barrier to help progress the women, because they're sitting there. We're sitting there. This is equity versus equality. It's like extra things need to be done for women to help get them up there until we do exist in an equal world. We're not there yet. And in the meantime, there has to be these extra helping hand, this recognition of the extra barriers that exist for women in the workplace, women in change.
No, that's a great example. Very very real things which just make it harder for women to move up from the more junior positions. Anna Maria, kind of any further thoughts on the article from you?
No, I think in terms of equity and equality, I totally resonate with what Mel said. And if I look back, I was replaced by a man, so I resigned. Guess who replaced me? A man. This says everything. I think the supply chain is still a traditional function, so it needs in the current reality. We see on one side a total digitalization of warehousing, automation, GPS, HGV drivers equipped with the latest technology. On the other hand, in terms of process, organization, in terms of career management, it's old school, and this needs to stop. And this is why I'm here, because I'm a huge advocate and I'm speaking from my experience. I stepped in a male-dominated world to bring my fresh outlook, but nothing has changed in 4 years, or it's moving slowly. And when I look back, it's still the changes are still very very slow.
Yeah, and Bethany, I mean, I think it's really interesting, that point that entering the supply chain kind of profession, it's about 50-50, Melanie was saying, and yet we get this real problem in sort of, I guess, dropout as moving to middle and senior management roles. And is that something that you're seeing in your role?
I think there's a challenge of dropout in any case, regardless of gender or indeed any other demographic. And I think some of that is down to, and we'll talk more about this later, I'm sure. Some of this is about that retention point. In the article, it talks about data, cybersecurity, perhaps untraditional supply chain roles. It also mentions driving, warehousing, and the fight for talent there. We're not only looking at, are you a third party or an in-house? We're looking at you could be anywhere. You could be in any sector, and you've chosen, or we're hoping that you'll choose logistics. If you then do that as a data analyst or one of the roles that is highly in demand across the majority of sectors, how do we make our sector appealing? What stops them dropping out? Whichever demographic we can think of, that happens, and it happens for a number of different reasons. But it's painting that picture of we're a great sector to work in, but actually following that through by having workplaces to be proud of. And I'm sure we will get into that more as we move forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move to the main topic. So the article obviously was focusing more on recruitment and getting people to fill the shortages. Our main topic is focusing more on, you've got people there, how do you retain and develop them? How do you retain and develop your talent? And the first point we've got is how supply chain technology is impacting talent retention. And I think, Melanie, a recent survey you've done, you will share the results of that in terms of kind of what people say about software and so on. And I think that's quite an interesting one in terms of the impact of technology on their jobs and their job satisfaction.
Yeah, so we ran a survey of Boom in the summer and released the results of this autumn. And we had this great open question. It's like, which was just like, if you could wave a magic wand and have one thing that would just make your life so much easier, increase your productivity, what would it be? And the number one thing people wanted was digitalization as a good single source of data. It would just make their lives so much easier. And I mean, that is anecdotally, because I was in supply chain for 20 years, working with a lot of data analytics, all of that stuff. And the hassle, the amount of, sorry, I'm going to have a mini rant here. The amount of time I've spent cleaning up data in my career because you've got siloed systems. Alistair, I know you come from a maths background too, so I'm sure you've done a lot of data analytics too. It's so frustrating. And then you hear people saying, oh, there's a lot of people don't, there's a lot of resistance, change management. And I've been to a lot of conferences this autumn, and it was quite funny because it was actually a lot of the senior management saying, you know what, I think it's us in senior management who are resistant to digitization because we're terrified. Okay, I'm ad-libbing a bit there. We're concerned about it. It is a huge risk. It's like we had this ERP, implementation in the noughties. It was a disaster. Does supply chain digitalization, does that mean the same? So there's this disconnect. What does it truly mean? Because the people on the ground doing the operational roles, doing the analytics, we know we need that data. We know, everybody knows from the pandemic that we need to go digital. We need this technology, but it's bizarrely, it's educating the higher up in the hierarchy, those chief supply chain officers saying, it's not going to break your supply chain. It's going to be better. Here are your options.
Yeah, but that's very interesting though, that how the survey, very interesting how the survey was not therefore saying, IT and systems are a threat and people resent them. It's actually people wanting more effective ones to make their jobs better.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good. And Maria, I think we were talking yesterday on a sort of related thing about the need or the opportunity of better forecasting systems, but how that in turn means that part of that supply chain skill shortage is actually around mathematically or analytically capable people. So is that something you've seen in your...
Yes, and I think especially the big corporations, they are now onboarding, they transform the function, the supply chain. And I was few years ago, whilst heading up supply chain function, I was in charge actually to do not only the change management and to take the team through a massive change that involved new processes, new tools, and new organization design. As part of, I think when people found out about the amazing tools, they were excited. So this is something I experienced. But what I noticed, it was very hard to get hold of great skill set in terms of demand forecasting, because in my case, the company decided to come up with analytical forecast using mathematical modeling in order to forecast, to replace the traditional 18 months forecasting. So this required a new skill set, which is either you go outside and you recruit a very different skill set, or internally you start the training, an internal training program. So yes, it's very much needed, this technology, and we are seeing it, and we all need to embrace it. It's nothing to be scared of.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. And Bethany, I think you were talking about technology helping on communications. very much in your one of your big focuses. And do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with the points that Anna and Melanie have made about the importance and applicability of brilliant and wonderful tech in supply chains to make everyone's job easier. But I think one of the frustrations that we hear from young professionals in particular is the lack of, I guess, to them, basic technology in supply chain companies, never mind supply chain technology in supply chain companies. So if you think about, your average graduate, let's say 23, 24 years old, they are digital natives. They have grown up with constant communication, social media, school peers, being able to keep in touch online over games. They've never been unconnected in many ways. And yet in work, that's not always something that is prized. So a Slack chat or a Teams chat or Yammer chat, oh, that's social media, we won't be having any of that. And you know, that's it, they're getting an annual performance review, and that's the only time that they're getting any, you know, chat. Again, I'm being glib, clearly there's companies out there who are doing this particularly, you know, very well, but that if they're used to having a feedback format, be that shouting into the void on Twitter, or your preferred social media of choice, or keeping in, you know, in touch with friends and teachers and what have you, if that is then removed when they hit the workplace because of these heritage practices that we've talked about, it's not a great working environment for them. And I'm going to guess it's not a great working environment for most of us, you know, never mind the younger generation. So I think even things that feel inherently unprofessional to some people, like a WhatsApp group, or, you know, we can all think of those managers perhaps that go, oh no, it can be the glue that binds people together, that when we hit a hideous piece of data, as Melanie said, and you've got to unpick it, you know, that's the glue that binds us together, having the ability to talk about that somewhere and help each other out. So even some of the quicker wins around technology to improve a company culture and improve a company's togetherness, they shouldn't be overlooked on top of, you know, all the great tech that is out there when used correctly to support good supply chain practice.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. And we'll be talking quite a lot about the opportunities that technology can bring to help, you know, people, you know, be fulfilled, enjoy their jobs better, and do more effectively. What about some of the sort of the negatives? I mean, Melanie, I'm not sure if your survey covered it, but I mean, do people feel, you know, massively threatened by new technology? You know, the robots are going to replace us, or do they feel under pressure because technology is measuring their productivity, you know, in every step they take in the warehouse and every moment they're not walking around the warehouse? So did your survey and your own work show that up as quite a sort of problem in supply chains now?
No, it didn't actually. I'm just thinking that. Sorry, I haven't thought about that one before. But no, the overwhelming response because there were 4 themes that came out of this survey, and one of them was digitization. But it was all very, very positive, with this constant call of just want a single source of truth. That was a phrase that I came across again and again and again, and it really, as you can see, resonated with me. And what was interesting was we also asked people, you know, what area of supply chain do you think you need to learn about to keep current in your career? You know, what's going to advance your career? And most of the top ones included relied heavily on data, so AI, advanced analytics, advanced plan, all of these things that people know that they need to stay current, to be able to progress in their career. But most of the companies they're working for don't have the software to back it up because they're so data intensive. To be able to do any of those things, you've got to have the technology to support it. So I'd say that's the negatives that's sitting there. There's this desire to do more, but the existing technology is actually holding people back. Okay,
no, that's interesting perspective. And Anna, kind of again, have you?
Yeah, I can build up actually from continuing on my experience. 2 years ago, I remember when I kicked off the supply chain transformation that came up with new technology. Of course, the new organization design was very different to the previous one. And we needed to consult people because it impacted people. And I think big organizations like multinational companies that I used to work for, they need to keep up with the increase, to be more current and to be there at the right time, especially with the e-commerce increasing. So they do the right thing to digitalize, but it comes with a cost. And yes, there were massive reorganization designs. It was not easy to consult, to have a collective consultation, to have individual consultation. And I think that was one of the toughest part of my job. But on the other hand, there are amazing opportunities to reshuffle the talent around, especially big organizations. Yeah, but the technology comes with a risk. Yes, but it's up to each individual how you look at it. You look at it with an open mindset, or you look at it as a threat.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. Yeah. And Bethany, what's your perspective? Are there lots of major negatives to technology, or is it really all opportunity?
I think one of the negatives which shouldn't necessarily be underestimated is dragging in technology for technology's sake. Mm-hmm. So thinking of being very generalist here, but perhaps some of our older drivers who are now being encouraged strongly to do their driver CPC or whatever course it is that they're looking to do to develop, to progress, or indeed just to stay compliant online. And that might not suit everyone's learning styles. It might not suit everyone's technological ability. It might not suit everyone's technological, they might not have, quite simply have the tech to do it. And yet, understandably through COVID, there was a push for that way, but that hasn't necessarily lessened, or some of those lessons about is it applicable haven't perhaps been thought through as much as I'd like. So the accessibility of it, I guess, does need to be thought about. But I think from a negative that we often hear is, well, that makes people redundant. Technology makes people redundant. I'm sure it does, but so do lots of things.
Yeah.
Technology isn't the sole thing that makes people redundant.
No.
And I think a good organisation with good people that they want to retain will upskill, will repurpose. And I don't think streamlining using technology or growing using technology should be put on hold because the robots are stealing our jobs.
Yeah,
we hear that a lot, and I think that's not only false, in my opinion, but it's also quite a big turn off for people looking at the sector. We're talking forward thinking, we're talking careers of the future, and excitingly, we don't know what they will be in 5 years because the pace of tech is moving in such a brilliant direction. When we do work in schools and colleges, we're going, don't know, come in, be part of the change, invent the future. Hugely exciting.
Yeah,
we've got to be focused on making sure that group comes along on that journey as well and doesn't fear the change.
Absolutely. Well, we've got an interesting question, in fact, from Ashley Cook about the fact that we've got lots and lots of technology, but are we investing enough in the training to get the best out of it? So Melanie, do we think training is actually it leads nicely to our sort of next point about improving the soft skills as well, but particularly in terms of training people to have those skills and to be able to use the new technology that's coming on board. Are we doing enough there?
No, I don't think we are. There's so many points to touch on here. We keep coming back to, I think, career development and succession planning, because I speaking to one senior leader recently, said, you've got great people, you've probably got everyone you already need pretty much in your organization. Ideally, you just bump everyone up and you just keep bringing them all up, and you bring someone in at entry level. That's, if you've got good retention, you should be bringing them up. And if we come back to the survey, sorry, there's just so much data in it though. We asked what's the main reason people leave. What's the number one reason that you would leave a company? And the number one reason was career progression.
Right. Yeah. So very much related to that point about soft skills and improving them for greater profitability and stability. But clearly, if you can retain people and soft skills as part of that, then you're going to get that stability and profit.
Well, the thing they said is, so the number one reason to leave is career progression, and number two was I'm not using all my skills. But the top three reasons to stay is people are investing in me, so personal development, be that soft skills or hard skills. Clear career progression, so understanding where you could go, so seeing what those career paths could be, and then three, very clear criteria for job progression. So if a job comes up, knowing exactly what skills are needed to get it, so that you can see it. So those soft skills, if you invest in the people, soft and hard skills, develop them, they will stay. So it's very, they leave, you don't progress. If they're not progressing, they'll stay if you progress them and invest in them. So
absolutely,
quite an easy story.
Yeah, Anna, in terms of soft skills, is there enough focus on developing people's soft skills?
In supply chain, I think also the article referred to what's needed in supply chain as a soft skill is connectivity and communication. With so much changing daily, you need to communicate, to articulate clear messages, blunt messages, because supply chain is not about marketing, it's about clear, facts-based, real-time communication. Who are the best communicators? Women. We have that soft skill. So I think this needs to be recognized, and that's why more women, because we are naturally, good communicators, we need to be encouraged to take that talent route. And it's also, I would add to the list that Melanie said, I would add one more from my experience. I would add one more element that's needed, or two: the culture, the overall culture of a company. Is it diverse, equitable, and inclusive enough to create the environment for the right talent to stay? And second, discriminatory practices in performance management. In order to recognize talent, you need to assess your talent. And if the assessment doesn't, is not equitable, or there are discriminatory practices during the performance management, then you get it wrong. And that's why you end up with the same pool of supply talent, which is not diverse. That's why the big resignation and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Bethany, what are your thoughts on improving basic soft skills within supply chain? Or is that an area which needs a lot more focus?
I don't think it's the job of supply chain. I think it's the job of education.
Right.
And I think we've got, of course, there's further progression to be done when you enter the world of work. But a lot of the work that I do, even with university students, they have not had that basic grounding across school, college, and university that says, this is how you conduct yourself in a business setting. Never mind, this is how you analyze data and separate fact from fiction. So a huge amount more there to be done. And, a personal bugbear of mine, things like we don't teach financial literacy, maths, and we don't equate the two as being a useful life skill. So I think a lot of that, to Ashley's point about the filtering of data, the reviewing the misinformation, and making sure that we make better judgments, growing up through an education system that supports us to do that will inherently make us better, rather than, once we hit the workplace, rather than day one being expected, because you're a graduate or you've left school, to have those skills. So a huge amount more there, I think, from an education point that needs to be done to support the workers of the future.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, that it's it's before you even start your working career that there's a lot of better grounding perhaps that should be done, which is getting a bit wider in a way than our debate on supply chain, but really good to raise that. Actually, just before we get to the sort of final point about, which leads actually nicely into it, developing a diversity and inclusion strategy, Ashley's asked another good question about, have we come across the Tech Talent Charter and its push to bring in a more diverse workforce? So Melanie, have you come across that? Is that relevant to supply chain?
I haven't come across it, but yeah, because there's massive overlap between tech and supply chain. Okay. So no, I need to have a look at that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ashley. We'll definitely
have a look.
Yeah, just before we move back to you, Melanie, Bethany, Anna, have you come across the tech?
No, me neither. No.
Okay. Well, we will look into that, Ashley, and hopefully we'll all be learning from that one. Melanie, back to you then. So in terms of diversity and inclusion strategies, what are your sort of tips on how you develop that type of strategy?
Oh, sorry, this is a hard one just because I'm actually working on one at the moment, so I know too much. So I'm going to
Keep it short.
I think it's the nicest example is speaking with a woman that ran a manufacturing plant in the US, and she was barely 5 foot, a petite woman running the manufacturing plant. And she said, well, you know what, if I can't do any job in the manufacturing plant, there's a problem, because how are we going to get everybody in do it, And so they just had this rule that's like, well, if Halima can't do it, we've got a problem. So it just immediately brings inclusivity, and it's just like, well, we need to be able to, the boss needs to be able to do the job, and it's just thinking in that everything. And the thing was, and the other thing she said that I love is culture trumps strategy every time. And one of her interview questions, which I found, just so obvious yet a revelation, which was asking an interview, it's like, what are your views on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And it's a really obvious one, isn't it? But I still hadn't come across it. And it's like, that's such a great question, because you can start, it talks about the culture that you want to bring into your organization, showing that you value it, and seeing if someone's actually aware of it. And all the changes she brought around in her manufacturing plant, all the guys were ecstatic about it too, because they hated all the really heavy lifting jobs. From a risk point of view, from a health and safety, if you've got the machinery that is better set up for everybody to use, it's just a safer, better environment.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think it's an issue, just as one of my students at Cranfield, who I was working with earlier in the year, and it was interesting that he compared 2 job advertisements in his own organization, and one of them was sort of saying, this is a low-level warehouse job, and saying, you've got to be sort of fit and able or whatever. And we were agreeing, well, what does that mean? And what does that say to someone who may not be a super fit person, but actually, do you seriously need to be able to kind of, lift 10 tons of goods during a day? Do you have to walk 10 miles?
And you shouldn't have to.
You shouldn't have to, absolutely.
But OH&S, you just shouldn't have to. And the problem with that is it's very gendered language, so you're not getting the women in. That's a whole different conversation, which is, start right back there with, what does your job ad look like? And if it's like that, it's like, well, that's a boy job. I've heard people say that to me. That's a boy job. It's like, no, supply chain's great for women too. Come in, but you can see, and there's software now that you can put your job ad into it, and it'll take out all the gendered words. And it's magic. So, another area.
Absolutely, great. Anna Maria, what obviously your real area of expertise for you about developing diversity and inclusion strategy. What would your advice be here?
Yeah, and this is why I pivoted my career after 20 years in supply chain and procurement. I pivoted my career into diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I've seen it all in 20 years, also on my skin, and also by managing teams, diverse teams. If you look around, one example now, if I ask everyone who's in this session to go on LinkedIn and look for diversity, equity, and inclusion jobs, everybody, or 90%, let's say, 90% of the jobs are sitting with HR. This is wrong, because HR and diversity and equity and inclusion should be standalone functions, segregation of duties, and they should create a healthy challenge. So diversity, equity, and inclusion should challenge HR on performance management, inclusive performance management practices, on hiring a more diverse and equitable talent. Also, diversity, equity, and inclusion should challenge the board. The board needs to champion diversity, equity, and inclusion. What I'm seeing, what I witnessed in my former jobs, I witnessed actually us, the underrepresented professionals, leading a lot of movements in order to educate people on racism, discrimination, microaggression. Why us?
Exhausting. It's exhausting to have to do it.
We are being targeted. Actually, the education starts with the majority. And who is the best positioned to lead by example? The board. So I'm very passionate about this, but guess what? Who are my clients and who approach me? The small organizations. Because the small organizations, they really want to drive authentic changes to get it right. Because the big reshuffle happens where? With the big corporations. If we look in the news, are the big tech companies in California, people being made redundant because they got it wrong. So I would like to see diversity, equity, and inclusion as a standalone function and department in order to accelerate the change, because the change in supply chain there is no change.
Yeah, it's an interesting viewpoint. I mean, is there a slight risk? Bethany, moving to you again, comment as you want, but is there a slight risk if you made it really a separate department? Does it become a little bit isolated, or it should be part of everyone's kind of working culture in every decision and every action they take, rather than being something separate? But what do you think, Bethany?
I think whatever you do, it has to feel genuine. And I think if it is not somebody's job, it can be very easily, yes, it does need to be everybody's job, but it does need somebody or a department, depending obviously on the size of the company, championing the focus. Not we're the only people that are going to do it in the organization, but we're going to look for opportunities for everyone to showcase. And I think, it's a bit like, it sounds odd perhaps to suggest a company that doesn't have an HR department, but let's say we have a company without an HR department, and it's up to the managers to focus on, sickness, absence, learning and development. The managers have got day jobs. It's not that they don't think those things are important, but they might not be as acutely aware of them, or indeed, more importantly, up on the legalities of it and the best practice examples.
Yeah,
so I think it's down to having that communication across departments, but absolutely having champions and making sure those champions, be it a department, be it individuals, are not always always the woman, or always
people of color,
people of color, or people with different sexual orientations, or whatever your diversity characteristic of choice is. We just go, you are now, that has to stop. Because it is everyone's responsibility. But I do, to Anna's point, think that having that department for whom that is a focus, they become the experts, they become the ones that can cascade that best practice support if there are challenges. That is really important. But whatever we do, we have to be genuine. Particularly the younger generation can smell the proverbial from a mile off. And if we are, only ticking boxes and I'm an investor in people because it's on my letterhead, for example.
No, absolutely.
We will be in trouble, because they will ask those insightful questions at interview, and they will expect you to follow through with the answers that you've given, as we all should. But I think particularly that group are being a lot more attuned to companies' vision and values. Are they walking the talk and making them, put their money where their mouth is?
Yeah, and I think, but I mean, the very fact we're talking about it today, I think things have moved on, not enough. It's got a long way to go. But I think there's parallels even with health and safety. And health and safety, I think at one point, wasn't really thought of enough. Then it became very much separate teams, and was health and safety, stop us doing this and stop us doing that. And now, you've got health and safety experts and partners for companies and divisions and so on. But I think it's true to say that really there are not many decent companies that I ever work with who don't have health and safety absolutely as genuinely part of the culture. So I guess that's the type of journey we're on now with diversity and inclusion. So
can I just bring it back to this one thing, which is the business case for DE&I? It's like we keep, we're saying, it should be everybody's responsibility, and we need a separate, however it's done. You just need to do it, because you make, if money's what you care about and the success of your business, do it for that.
Absolutely.
For us, it will make our careers a lot easier, because there have been times when I'm pretty sure we've all been discriminated against based on our gender, but
No, these things go, absolutely.
You'll make more money is the bottom line.
They're the right things to do, and they're the right things for the business as well. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. It's a topic we could talk about for much longer, for sure. So thank you very much for your contributions. Just the final things. Ashley, thank you for your contributions, and particularly we will all be looking into the Tech Talent Charter. So thank you for raising that, and a Supply Chain Talk mug will be on its way to you. And sorry, we couldn't get round to some of the other comments and questions from some of the other in the audience. And as a reminder, our next episode is not until the 18th of January 2023, so next year, of course, at 4 p.m, which is looking at AI-powered safety to protect employees and the bottom line. So that's one that we'll be looking at in mid-January, so tune in then. And meanwhile, thank you again to Melanie Salter, Director of Supply Chain Research at Boom Global Network, to Anna Maria Velica, founder and director at Green Apples Career, and Bethany Windsor, Head of Programs and Relationship Management at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. So thank you, all three of you, fantastic contributions, and thank you, our audience, and have a very good seasonal break, and see you in the new year. Goodbye.